Just wanted to appreciate having the time here today and being invited to this. You have a lot of folks, very smart folks who are on the panel with me. And I'm kind of this outlier. I work for Association of Washington Business. We are Washington State's Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Manufacturing Association. And we get a lot of questions about why is business involved in the childcare issue? What is our role here? Why were we a part of this? And you know, I got a lot of that from, and I apologize, my slideshow is not advancing. Okay. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. We got a lot of questions when we started to be a part of this from our board members, our members. We represent about 7,000 businesses across Washington State in all industry sectors. And the majority of ours are small to medium-sized businesses. And as Angie said, our childcare providers are a business as well. But as was previously mentioned, you know, childcare, this is our workforce of today as well as our workforce for tomorrow. We need to make sure that we are taking care of our employees so that they can show up to work today, and that we have quality childcare and early childhood learning programs so that we are developing that next generation of workforce. And just as a side note, and I'll do this kind of throughout my presentation to give you a good idea of how the business community has slowly come into this conversation. And as you saw from some of Rob's slides from the U.S. Chamber, they're doing a lot of good work around studying the issue. But we did have some really hard conversations at first when I talked about in our groups that we were working with about this being a current and future workforce. We actually had some providers and some agency folks say, whoa, we can't talk about our babies as workers. They're still young. We're talking about loving them and taking care of them. And that is true, but that is the basis, the foundation that we will prepare them to become workers. So it's an ever evolving conversation. When we surveyed our employers, we found that about 67% of them did report that they had childcare issues, which caused absenteeism among their employees. And of course, this has already been shared, there's a huge return on investment in investing in our early childhood learning and childcare efforts. So what I'm showing here is how did business get involved in this in Washington State? It was through legislative action. In 2018, we had the Child Care Collaborative Task Force established. It's run through our Washington State Department of Commerce. And one of the key components of this legislation is that it required business to be at the table. And as we work with the U.S. Chamber and some of our colleagues across the country, that's not always the case. It's seen as a government responsibility to decide what's happening with our early childhood learning and our childcare efforts. And so Washington has been extremely successful in having our business folks at the table. I am part of I am one of 3 co-chairs or tri-chairs on the task force, in addition to a provider and a childcare advocate. So we have a really good grounding as far as the different perspectives and stakeholders who are at the table. When we extended the work in 2019, we did have some pushback, and we had legislators who wanted business absolutely out of the conversation. They felt like we had no business whatsoever being at the table talking about childcare. Well, in Washington State, where we don't have an income tax, we are dependent on business taxes and property taxes to fund our state. It is the businesses, including our childcare providers, who are providing the funding for this. So we've done as of last fall, 2019, we did an economic impact study on what was the impact to Washington State's economy and Washington State businesses of the lack of affordable and accessible childcare. Well, what we found was that directly, employers lose about $2.08 billion annually because of a lack of affordable, accessible childcare. And as has already been mentioned, that means people are unable to get to work. They miss their scheduled shifts. They lose their jobs. They are unable to take promotions or other jobs, career laddering possibilities, because they do not have access to childcare. And then overall, Washington State's economy loses a little over $6 billion a year because of a lack of affordable, accessible childcare. So we were able to, through the task force, do a little bit more digging down this year. At the beginning of the year, pre-pandemic, we had already had plans to take a deeper dive, look into the industry, because by legislative action, we are required this fall to present a list of suggestions, policy suggestions to the state legislature before they head into the 2021 legislative session in January. And as you can see by this list, and I won't read through all of them there, but you can see that there are childcare issues impacting absolutely every demographic of our working population. If you take a look at that first one, agree that childcare issues negatively impact the parent's job. Very broad group of employees. Go down to about the fourth bullet point, report having turned down a job offer or promotion due to childcare issues in the last 12 months. Unfortunately, that is impacting a lot of our lower income and already groups that are struggling, preventing them from increasing their learning potential. So it's definitely, as we've already pointed out, something that we certainly need to be paying more attention to. This is Washington State's, we already talked about childcare deserts. I believe on one of the previous slides, it did show 63% of our workers do live in childcare deserts in Washington State. So again, through our efforts with our new industry analysis starting in this spring, we were able to pivot a bit and really take a look at how COVID is impacting our childcare industry. So as of June 25th, you can see there some the loss of capacity in childcare across the state. And if you take a look at, so up at the top there, Whatcom County on down to Skamania, that's about where our mountain divide is there. And so we always look at Eastern Washington, Western Washington, and Western Washington definitely has more of our population. And then of course, Eastern Washington, we have quite a few rural counties. So if you look at Columbia down there in bright red, 60% decline, Klickitat County, almost 77%. And then looking out onto the peninsula there, Jefferson County, 51% decline, Clallam County, 26% decline. A lot of these counties already had a critical shortage. And so as we start to look at how do we bring back our economy, we cannot have any type of a plan, we cannot have any type of an economic recovery discussion unless we are talking about childcare. And this is a good takeaway from that. Some other data points that we did find as we were doing the survey is that 20% of childcare providers were temporarily closed when we first started out. A lot of that had to do with they were categorized as essential workers, but they did not necessarily have enough children in it to stay open. 4% of childcare educators were laid off or furloughed in Washington State, and 64% of the childcare businesses that were surveyed lost over 50% of their income. We also found, and I think there was a question in the chat there, 30%, or the costs for childcare centers were about 30% higher due to increased sanitation, hygiene, and lower child to staff ratios that occurred because of COVID. So the last two slides, and you all will be getting those, really shows a lot of the data from Washington State's survey. Percent of parents who need childcare outside traditional hours, there's 25% there. Estimated average foregone personal income due to childcare inaccessibility, almost $17 billion a year. Percent of unemployed parents who consider a lack of childcare a barrier to reemployment, 47%. And I don't think we've seen that real number yet until we start really opening up our economy. So just as a wrap up here, before I turn it back over, again, I think that the part here that I was playing is where is business in this conversation and why are we here? It's critical. We have a vested interest, business has a vested interest in their employees' welfare, their employees' well-being. And that also means how do we get, where are we putting their kiddos? It's a tough time right now. And I give a shout out to all of you who are providing this service as I talk to our providers who are members, what they're going through right now and having to meet the regulatory environment that was already overly burdensome is just something that that we certainly need to be paying more attention to. So any questions around, how do we get our businesses involved? They do need to be at the table. They are critical stakeholders in this, and our businesses do appreciate all that you are doing. So I'll turn it back over to you, Naomi.